The Collector of Treasures by Bessie Head. An introductory note to Bessie Head. Bessie Emery Head is one of Africa's most prominent writers. She was born in South Africa in 1937, the child of an illicit union between a Scottish woman and a black man. Head was taken from her mother at birth and raised in a foster home until the age of 13. Head's life was constantly in a state of flux. She suffered from a depressive personality and she often experienced financial problems. Head married her husband Harold Head in 1961 and they had a son also named Harold in 1962. Soon after, her marriage was on the rocks and for neighboring Botswana had left her marriage and South Africa for good to teach in Surrey. Had taught and worked on a farm, gathering information for her books. She gained citizenship 15 years after moving to Botswana and was considered a refugee until that point. Towards the end of her life, she began to exhibit signs of mental illness. She died in 1986 at the age of 48 as a result of hepatitis. Head began writing for the Golden City Post. In 1964, personal problems led her to take up a teaching post in Botswana, where Head remained in refugee status for 15 years before gaining citizenship. All three of her major novels, When Rain Clouds Gather, Maru, and A Question of Power, along with others, were written in Botswana during this period. Bessie Head died in Botswana in 1986 at the young age of 49. Head's novels evolved from an objective, affirmative narrative of an exile finding new meaning in his adopted village in When Rain Clouds Gather to a more introspective account of the acceptance won by a light colored son, Bushman, women in a black dominated African society in Maru. A Question of Power is a frankly autobiographical account of disorientation and paranoia in which the heroine survives by sheer force of will. The Collector of Treasures 1977, a volume of short fiction, includes brief vignettes of traditional Botswanan village life, macabre tales of witchcraft, and passionate attacks on African male chauvinism. Had said that literature must be a reflection of daily encounters with undistinguished people. Her works reveal empathy with children, with women treated as dead things in South Africa, and with idealistic planners who meet indifference and greed at the marketplace. Although she claimed to be vehemently non political in her actions, Head's writing dwell on injustice and oppression in the political arena in South Africa and her hopes for social change and peace in the future. An introduction to the Collector of Treasures. Among Head's books, The Collector of Treasures 1977, a very gender oriented collection of African short stories full of female and male characters and different perspectives, symbolizes her whole life experience and literary career. If the stories of the village are simultaneously stories of the modernizing society, they are also versions of Hare's own story. However, the first origin of her plots lies in the oral sources of village gossip. shaped into subtle tales, and in the main interviews many interviews and conversations enjoyed with the locals. And among the short stories of the book, The Collector of Treasures, giving the whole collection its title, is the most symbolic of them all. The story revolves around the central character, Dick, and her relationship with her husband, Garisego, which is a stark contrast to the marriage of the neighbors. Kinalipi and Paul, Bessie Head's vignette of a village woman abandoned and abused by her husband, begins in medias res. In the first of the story's fourth section, Dikildi is on her way to prison in Gaborone, the country's new capital city, from her village, Puleng. She is accused of manslaughter, killed her husband, and is sentenced for life. Dikilidi is placed with four other women who have also murdered their husbands. We learn that Dikilidi has number of skills. She could knit, sew, and weave baskets, and has provided for her family by using these skills when her husband abandoned her. Characteristics of Head short stories. Head explores several aspects of African life, especially the position of women, focusing on the tragic human experience of oppression. Native African subject. How colonialism snatched their dignity and made them powerless in their own land. In the present story, an attempt has been made to foreground the oppressed and exploited rural women. Breakdown of the family life, denying the traditional structure of security that the institution of marriage provided to married women, vulnerable sexual exploitation of married women, female characters learning to survive the emotional, sexual, and psychological violence built into the everydayness of patriarchal society. Depict African women as a victim of colonialism, apartheid, and patriarchy. Female protagonists create for themselves a destiny of their own. Africa in three phases. Through this story, through this short story, Head looks at Africa through the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial lenses. She takes notes of various positive and negative transformations in Africa. In pre colonial Africa, the ancestral traditional practices were of utmost importance. Africans followed these practices were without questioning them. Dominance of African men in the name of culture is noticeable. Women were victims of these social systems in Africa. New systems encroached in the traditional and cultural life of Africa. Breaking down of the institutions forms of family life in Africa was rampant. Mining became source of earning livelihood. Working for pittance to pay British tax. People's migration from one place to another provided space for women. Vast job opening with heavy salary was common in Africa. In consequence, African men were becoming immoral and corrupt. Women were placed at the receiving end but started fighting of creating their space. Character list: Dikilidi Mokipi. Protagonist who is abandoned and abused by her husband, kills her husband and is sent to prison. Provides for her three children on her own and is a collector of treasures. Her name means tears. Garesago, husband of Dikilidi, father of Dikilidi's three children, worked as a clerk, a womanizer, and a drunk. Banabothe, eldest son of Dikildi, gets an a grade on his primary school leaving exam. Inalame, Dikildi's son, Motsomi, Dikildi's youngest son. Paul Thebelo, Dikildi's new neighbor, has three children with his wife Kenalepe. Kenalepe, Paul's wife and Dikildi's best friend. Kebunye, Oswetse, Galebo, and Monavana, Dikildi's friends in prison. Setting: Pooling, Central State Prison, Gaborone are the settings of the story. On her way to prison in the police van, Dickledy discovers, like all those driven to the age, the need to again. Her interior landscape is projected onto the land in this powerfully evocative scene. At first, faintly on the horizon, the orange glow of the city, lights of the new independence town of Gaborone, appeared like an astonishing phantom in the overwhelming darkness of the bush, until the truck struck tiered roads, neon lights, shops, and cinemas, and made the bush a phantom amidst a blare of light. The text: The long term Central State Prison in the south was a whole day's journey away from the villages of the northern part of the country. They had left the village of Pooling at about 9 that morning, and all day long the police truck droned as it sped southwards on the wide, dusty cross country track road. The everyday world of ploughed fields, grazing cattle, and vast expanses of bush and forest seemed indifferent to the hungry eyes of the prisoner who gazed out at them through the wire mesh grating at the back of the police truck. At some point during the journey, the prisoner seemed to strike at some ultimate source of pain and loneliness within her being, and overcome by it, she slowly crumpled forward in a wasted heap, oblivious to everything but her pain. Sunset swept by, then dusk, then dark, and still the truck droned on, impersonally uncaring. At first, faintly on the horizon, the orange glow of the city lights of the new independence town of Gaborone appeared like an astonishing phantom in the overwhelming darkness of the bush, until the truck struck tiered roads, neon lights, shops, and cinemas, and made the bush a phantom amidst a blaze of light. All this passed untimed, unwatched by the crumpled prisoner. She did not stir as the truck finally drove to a halt outside the prison gates. The torchlight struck the side of her face like an agonizing blow. Thinking she was asleep, the policeman called out briskly, "You must again now. We have arrived." He struggled with the lock in the dark and pulled open the grating. She crawled painfully forward in silence. Together, they walked up a short flight of stairs and waited a while as the man tapped lightly several times on the heavy iron prison door. The night duty attender opened the door a crack, peered out, and then opened the door a little wider for them to enter. He quietly and casually led the way to a small office, looked at his colleague as asked, "What do we have here?" "It's the husband murder case from Pooling Village," the other replied, handing over a file. The attendant took the file and sat down at a table on which lay upon a long record book. In a big, bold scroll, he recorded the details. Dikildi Mokopi, charge, man's laughter, sentence, life. A night duty wardress appeared and led the prisoner away to a side cubicle, where she was asked to undress. Have you any money? Have you any money on you? The wardress queried, handing her a plain green cotton dress, which was the prison uniform. The prisoner silently shook her head. So you have killed your husband, have you? The wardress remarked with a flicker of humor. You will in good company. We have four other women here for the same crime. It's becoming the fashion these days. Come with me. And she led the way along a corridor, turned left, and stopped at an iron gate, which she opened with a key, waited for the prisoner to walk in ahead of her, and then locked it with the key again. They entered a small, immensely high walled courtyard. On one side were toilets, showers, and a cupboard. On the other, an empty concrete quadrangle. The wardress walked to the cupboard, unlocked it, and took out a thick roll of clean smelling blankets, which she handed to the prisoner. At the lower end of the vault courtyard was a heavy iron door which led to the cell. The wardress walked up to this door, banged on it loudly, and called out, I say, will you women in the light your candle? A voice within called out, all right, and they could hear the scratch of a match. The wardress again inserted a key, opened the door, and watched for a while as the prisoner spread out her blankets on the floor. The four women prisoners already confined in the cell sat up briefly and stared silently at their new companion. As the door was locked, they all greeted her quietly. Auntie, one of the women asked, where do you come from? Pooling. The newcomer replied, and seemingly satisfied with that, the light was blown out, and the women lay down to continue their interrupted sleep. And as though she had reached the end of her destination, the new prisoner too fell into a deep sleep as soon as she had pulled her blankets about her. The breakfast gong sounded at 6 the next morning. The women steered themselves for their daily routine. They stood up, shook out their blankets, and rolled them up into neat bundles. The day duty wardress rattled the key in the lock and led them out into the small concrete courtyard so that they could perform their morning toilet. Then, with a loud clatter of pails and plates, two male prisoners appeared at the gate with breakfast. The men handed each woman a plate of porridge and a mug of black tea, and they settled themselves on the concrete floor to eat. They turned and looked at their new companion, and one of the women, a spokesman for the group, said kindly, you should take care. The tea has no sugar in it. What we usually do is scoop the sugar off the porridge and put it into the tea. The woman decently looked up and smiled. She had experienced such terror during the awaiting trial period that she looked more like a skeleton than a human being. The skin cracked tautly over her cheeks. The other woman smiled, but after her own fashion. Her face permanently wore a look of cynical, whimsical humor. She had a full, plump figure. She introduced herself and her companions. My name is Keboni. Then that's Otsetsi, Galebo, and Monvana. What may your name be? Lady Mokopi. How is it that you have such a tragic name? Kebony observed. Why did your parents have to name you Tears? My father passed away at that time, and it is my mother's tears that I am named after, Lady said, then added she herself passed away 6 years later, and I was brought up by my uncle. Kevin shook her head sympathetically, slowly raising a spoonful of porridge to her mouth. That swallowed, she asked next, and what may your crime be? I have killed my husband. We are all here for the same crime, Kebony said. Then, with her cynical smile, asked, do you feel any sorrow about the crime? Not really. The other woman replied, how did you kill him? I cut off all his special parts with a knife, Dick Lady said. I did it with a razor, Kebony said. She sighed and added, I have had a troubled life. A little silence followed while they all busied themselves with their food. Then Kebuni continued musingly, our men do not think that we need tenderness and care. You know, my husband used to kick me between the legs when he wanted that. I once aborted with a child due to this treatment. I could see that there was no way to appeal to him if I felt ill. So I once said to him that if I liked he could keep some other woman as well because I couldn't manage to satisfy all his needs. Well, he was an education officer, and each year he used to suspend about 17 male teachers for making schoolgirls pregnant, but he used to do the same. The last time it happened, the parents of the girl were very angry and came to report the matter to me. I told them, you leave it to me, I have seen enough, and so I killed him. They sat in silence and completed their meal. Then they took their plates and cups to rinse them in the washroom. The wardress produced some pails and a broom. Their sleeping quarters had to be flushed out with water. There was not a speck of dirt anywhere, but that was prison routine. All that was left was an inspection by the director of the prison. Here again Kebony turned to the newcomer and warned, you must be careful when the chief comes to inspect. He is mad about one thing. Attention. Stand up straight, hands at your sides. If this is not done, you should see how he stands here and curses. He does not mind anything but that. He is mad about that. Inspection over, the women were taken through a number of gates to an open, sunny yard fenced in by high barbed wire, where they did their daily work. The prison was a rehabilitation center where the prisoners produced goods which were sold in the prison store. The women produced garments of cloth and wool. The men did carpentry, shoemaking, brickmaking, and vegetable production. Declady had a number of skills. She could knit, sew, and weave baskets. All the women at present were busy knitting woolen garments. Some were learners and did their work slowly and painstakingly. They looked at Dicky Lady with interest as she took a ball of wool and a pair of knitting needles and rapidly cast on stitches. She had soft, caressing, almost boneless hands of strange power. Work of a beautiful design grew from those hands, By mid morning, she had completed the front part of a jersey, and they all stopped to admire the pattern she had invented in her own head. You are a gifted person, Kevini remarked admiringly. All my friends say so. Dignity replied, smiling. You know, I am the woman whose thatch does not leak. Whenever my friends wanted to thatch their huts, I was there. They would never do it without me. I was always busy and employed because it was with these hands that I fed and reared my children. My husband left me after 4 years of marriage, but I managed well enough to feed those mouths. If people did not pay me in money for my work, they paid me with gifts of food. It's not so bad here, Kevin said. We get a little money saved for us out of the sale of our work. And if you work like that, you can still produce money for your children. How many children do you have? I have 3 sons. Are they in good care? Yes. I like lunch, Kevin said, oddly turning the conversation. It is the best meal of the day. We get samp and meat and vegetables. So the day passed pleasantly, enough with chatter and work, and at sunset, the women were once more taken back to the cell for lock-up time. They unrolled their blankets and prepared their beds, and with the candle lit, continued to talk a while longer. Just as they were about to retire for the night, Dikildi nodded to her new-found friend Kebuni. Thank you for all your kindness to me, she said softly. We must help each other, Kebuni replied, with her amused cynical smile. This is a terrible world. There is only misery here. And so the women Tikildi began phase 3 of a life that had been ashen in its loneliness and unhappiness. And yet she had always found gold amidst the ash, deep loves that had joined her heart to the hearts of others. She smiled tenderly at Kevoni because she knew already that she had found another such love. She was the collector of such treasures. There were really only two kinds of men in the society. The one kind created such misery and chaos that he could be broadly damned as evil. If one watched the village dogs chasing a beach on heat, they usually moved around in packs of 4 or 5. As the mating progressed, one dog would attempt to gain dominance over the festivities and oust all the others from beach's vulva. The rest of the hapless dogs would stand around yapping and snapping in its face while the top dog indulged in a continuous spurt of orgasms day and night until he was exhausted. No doubt, during that Herculean feat, the dog imagined he was the only penis in the world and that there had to be a scramble for it. That kind of man lived near the animal level and behaved just the same, like the dogs and bulls and donkeys. He also accepted no responsibility for the young he procreated, and like the dogs and bulls and donkeys, he also made females abort. Since that kind of man was in the majority in the society, he needed a little analyzing as he was responsible for the complete breakdown of family life. He could be analyzed over 3 times span. In the old days, before the colonial invasion of Africa, he was a man who lived by the traditions and taboos outlined for all the people by the forefathers of the tribe. He had little, he had little individual freedom to access whether these traditions were compassionate or not. They demanded that he comply and obey the rules without thought. But When the laws of the ancestors are examined, they appear on the whole to have been vast external disciplines for the good of the society as a whole, with little attention given to individual preferences and needs. The ancestors made so many errors, and one of the most bitter making things was that they relegated to men a superior position in the tribe, while women were regarded in a congenital sense as superior person in the tribe, while congenital sense as being an inferior form of human life. While women were regarded in a congenital sense as being an inferior form of human life. To this day, women still suffered from all the calamities that befall an inferior form of human life. The colonial era and the period of migratory mining about to South Africa was a further affliction visited on this man. It broke the hold of the ancestors. It broke the old traditional form of family life, and for long periods, a man was separated from his wife and children while he worked for a pittance in another land in order to raise the money to pay his British colonial poll tax. British colonialism scarcely enriched his life. He then became the bow of the white man and a machine tool of the South African mines. African independence seemed merely one more affliction on top of the afflictions that had visited this man's life. Independent suddenly and dramatically changed the pattern of colonial subservience. More jobs became available under the new government's localization program, and salary sky rocketed at the same time. It provided the first occasion for family life of a new order above the childlike discipline of custom, the degradation of colonialism. Men and women, in order to survive, had to turn inwards to their own resources. It was the man who arrived it was the man who arrived at this turning point, a broken wreck with no inner resources at all. It was as though he was hideous to himself, and in an effort to flee his own inner emptiness, he spun away from himself in a dizzy kind of death dance of wild destruction and dissipation. One such man was Garisago Mokupi, the husband of Dekeledi. For 4 years prior to independence, he had worked as a clerk in the district administration service at a steady salary of rupees 50 a month. Soon after independence, his salary shot up to 200 rupees for per month. Even during his lean days, he had had a taste for womanizing and drink. Now he had the resources for a real spree. He was not seen at home again and lived and slept around the village from women to women. He left his wife and 3 sons, Banabothe, the eldest, aged 4, Inaleme, aged 3, and the youngest, Motsomi, aged 1, to their own to their own resources. Perhaps he did so because she was the boring, semi-literate, traditional sort, and there were a lot of exciting new women around. Independence produced marvels indeed. There was another kind of man in the society with the power to create himself anew. He turned all his resources, both emotional and material, towards his family life, and he went on and on with his own quiet rhythm, like a river. He was a poem of tenderness. One such man was Paul Thevelot, and he and his wife Penelope and their 3 children came to live in the village of Pooling in 1966, the year of independence. Paul Thevelot had been offered the principalship of a primary school in his village. In his village, they were allocated an empty field beside the yard of Dikeledi Mokupi for their new home. Neighbors are the center of the universe to each other. They help each other at all times and mutually loan each other's goods. Dikeledi Mokupi kept an interested eye on the yard of her new neighbors. At first, only the man appeared with some workmen to erect the fence, which was set up with incredible speed and efficiency. The man impressed her immediately when she went around to introduce herself and find out a little about the newcomers. He was tall, large boned, slow moving. He was so peaceful as a person that the sunlight and shadow played all kinds of tricks with his eyes, making it difficult to determine their exact color. When he stood still and looked reflective, the sunlight liked to creep into his eyes and nestle there. So sometimes his eyes were the color of shade and sometimes light brown. He turned and smiled at her in a friendly way when she introduced herself and explained that he and his wife were on a transfer from the village of Bobonong. His wife and children were living with relatives in the village until the yard was prepared. He was in a hurry to settle down as the school term would start in a month's time. They were, he said, going to erect two mud huts first, and later he intended setting up a small house of bricks. His wife would be coming around in a few days with some women to erect the mud walls of the huts. I would like to offer my help too, Dickey said. If work always starts early in the morning and there are about six of us, we can get both walls erected in a week. If you want one of the huts done in women's thatch, all my friends know that all my friends know that I am the woman whose thatch does not leak. The man smiling replied that he would impart all this information to his wife. Then he added charmingly that he thought she would like his wife when they met. His wife was a very friendly person. Everyone liked her. Dick walked back to her own yard with a high heart. She had few callers, none. None of her relatives called for fear that since her husband had left her, she would become dependent on them for many things. The people who called did business with her. They wanted her to make dresses for their children or knit jerseys for the winter time, and at times when she had no orders at all, she made baskets which she sold. In these ways, she supported herself and the three children, but she was lonely for true friends. All turned out as the husband had said. He had a lovely wife. She was fairly tall and thin, with a bright, vivacious manner. She made no effort to conceal that normally, and every day she was a very happy person. And all turned out as the Digildy had said. The work party of six women erected the mud walls of the huts in 1 week. 2 weeks later, the thatch was complete. The Thevelo family moved into their new abode, and Dikeledi Mokipi moved into one of the most prosperous and happy periods of her life. Her life took a big, wide upward curve. Her relationship with the Thevelo family was more than the usual friend exchange of neighbors. It was rich and creative. It was not long before the two women had going one of those deep, affectionate, sharing everything kind of friendship that only women know how to have. It seemed that Penelope wanted endless amounts of dresses made for herself and her three little girls. Since Dick would not accept cash for these services, she protested about the many benefits she received from her good neighbors. Paul Thevelot arranged that she be paid in household goods for these services, so that for some years Dick was always assured of her basic house, the full deck of corn, sugar, tea, powdered milk, and cooking oil. Penelope was also the kind of woman who made the whole world spin around her. Her attractive personality attracted a whole range of women to her yard and also a whole range of customers for her dressmaking friend Decady. Eventually, Decady became swamped with work, was forced to buy a second sewing machine and employ a helper. The two women did everything together. They were forever together at weddings, funerals, and parties in the village. In their leisure hours, they freely discussed all their intimate affairs with each other, so that each knew thoroughly the details of others' life. You are a lucky someone. You are a lucky someone, Decady remarked one day, wistfully. Not everyone has the gift of a husband like Paul. Oh, yes, Penelope said happily. He is an honest somebody. She knew a little of Dickie's list of woes and queried, but why did you marry a man like Garisago? I looked carefully at him. When you pointed him out to me near the shops the other day, and I could see at one glance that he is a butterfly. I think I mostly wanted to get out of my uncle's yard. Dickey replied, I never liked my uncle. Rich as he was a hard man and very selfish. I was only a servant there and pushed about. I went there when I was 6 years old, when my mother died, and it was not a happy life. All his children despised me because I was their servant. Uncle paid for my education for 6 years. Then he said I must leave school. I longed for more because, as you know, education opens up the world for one. Garcigo was a friend of my uncle, and he was the only man who proposed for me. They discussed it with themselves, and then my uncle said, "You would better marry Garcigo because you are just hanging around here like a chain on my neck." I agreed just to get away from that terrible man. Garcigo said at that time that he would rather be just to get away from that terrible man. Garcigo said he would rather be married to my sort than the educated kind because those women were stubborn and wanted to lay down the rules for men. Really, I did not ever protest when she started running about. You know what the other women do? They chase after the man from one hut to another and bear up the girlfriends. The man just runs into another hut. That's all. So you don't really win. I wasn't going to do anything like that. I am satisfied I have children. They are a blessing to me. Oh, it isn't enough, her friend said, shaking her head in deep sympathy. I am amazed at how life imparts its gifts. Some people get too much, others get nothing at all. I have always been lucky in life. One day my parents will visit. They live in the south, and you will see the fuss they make over me. Paul is hers the same. He takes care of everything so that I never have a day of worry. The man, Paul, attracted as wide a range of male friends as his wife. They had guests every evening, illiterate men who wanted him to fill in tax forms or write letters for them, or his own colleagues who wanted to debate the political issues of the day. There was always something new happening every day now that the country had independence. The two women sat on the edge of these debates and listened with fascinated ears, but they never participated. The following day, they would chew over the debates with wise, earnest expression. Men's minds travel widely and boldly. Penelope would comment, "It makes me shiver the way they freely criticize our new government. Did you hear what Petros said last night? He said he knew all those bastards and they were just a lot of crooks who would pull a lot of dirty tricks. Oh dear, I shivered so much when he said that." The way they talk about the government makes you feel in your bones that this is not a safe world to be in. Not like the old days when we didn't have governments. And Lansway said that 10% of the population 10% of the population in England really control all the wealth of the country, while the rest live at starvation level. And he said communism would sort all this out. I gather from the way they discuss this matter that our government is not in favor of communism. I trembled so much when this became clear to me. She paused and laughed proudly. I have heard Paul say this several times. The British only ruled us for 80 years. I wonder why Paul is so fond of saying that. And so a completely new world opened up opened for Dikildi. It was so impossibly rich and happy that as the days went by she immersed herself more deeply in it and quite overlooked the barrenness of her own life. But it hung there like a nagging ache in the mind of her friend Kinalipi. You ought to find another man, she urged one day. When they had one of their personal discussions, it's not good for a woman to live alone. And who would that be? Dickledy asked. Disillusioned, I would only be bringing trouble into my life, whereas now it is all in order. I have my eldest son at school, and I can manage to pay the school fees. That's all I really care about. I mean, said Penelope, we are also here to make love and enjoy it. Oh, I never really cared for it, the other replied. When you experience the worst of it, it just puts you off altogether. What do you mean by that? Penelope asked, wide eyed. I mean, it was just jump on and jump off, and I used to wonder what it was all about. I developed a dislike for it. You mean Garisagu was like that? Penelope said, flabbergasted. Why, that's just like a cock hopping from hen to hen. I wonder what he's doing with all those women. I'm sure they are just after his money and so they flatter him. She paused and then added earnestly, that's really all the more reason you should find another man. Oh, it if you knew what it was really like, you would long for it. I can tell you. I sometimes think I enjoy that side of life far too much. Paul knows a lot about all that, and he always has some new trick with which to surprise me. He has a certain way of smiling when he was thought of something new, and I shiver a little and say to myself, how, what is Paul going to do tonight? Penelope paused and smiled at her friend slyly. I can loan Paul to you if you like, she said, then raised one hand to block the protest on her friend's face. I would do it because I have never had a friend like you in my life before, whom I trust so much. Paul had other girls, before he married me, so it's not such an uncommon thing to him. Besides, we used to make love long before we got married, and I never got pregnant. He takes care of that side too. I wouldn't mind loaning him because I am expecting another child and I don't feel so well these days. Decady stared at the ground for a long moment. Then she looked up at her friend with tears in her eyes. I cannot accept such a gift from you, she said, deeply moved. But if we're ill, I will wash for you and cook for you. Not put off by her rear's refusal of her generous offer, Penelope mentioned the discussion to her husband that very night. He was so taken off guard by the unexpectedness of the subject that at first he looked slightly astonished and burst out into loud laughter for such a lengthy time that he seemed unable to stop. Why are you laughing that? Penelope asked, surprised. He laughed a bit more, then suddenly turned very serious and thoughtful, and he was lost in his own thoughts for some time. When she asked him what he was thinking, he merely replied, I don't want to tell you everything. I want to keep some of my secrets to myself. The next day, Penelope reported this to her friend. Now, whatever does he mean by that? I want to keep some of my secrets to myself. The next day, Penelope reported this to her friend. Now, whatever does he mean by that? I want to keep some of my secrets to myself. I think, Dickory said, smiling. I think he has a conceit about being a good man. Also, when someone loves someone too much, it hurts them to say so. They would rather keep silent. Shortly after this, Penelope had a miscarriage and had to be admitted to hospital for a minor operation. Dickory kept her promise to wash and cook for her friend. She ran both their homes, fed the children, and kept everything in order. Also, people complained about the poorness of the hospital diet, and each day she scoured the village for eggs and chicken, cooked them, and took them to Penelope every day at the lunch hour. One evening, Dickory ran into a snag with her routine. She had just dished up supper for the Thebolo children when a customer came around with an urgent request for an alteration on a wedding dress. The wedding was to take place the next day. She left the children seated around the fire eating and returned to her own home. An hour later, her own children asleep and settled, she thought she would check the Thebolo yard to see if all well there. She entered the children's hut and noted that they had put themselves to bed and were fast asleep. Their supper places were scattered and unwashed around the fire. The hut which Paul and Penelope shared was in darkness. It meant that Paul had not yet returned from his unusual evening visits to his wife. Decalady coalesced the plates and washed them. It means Decaldy collected the plates and washed them, then poured the dirty dish water on the still glowing embers of the outdoor fire. She piled the plates on one top of the other and carried them to the third additional hut, which was used as a kitchen. Just then, Paul Thevelo entered the yard, noted the lamp and movement in the kitchen hut, and walked over to it. He paused at the open door. What are you doing now, Banabote? Ma Banabote? He asked, addressing her affectionately in the customary way by the name of her eldest son, Banabote. I know quite well what I am doing, Dick replied happily. She turned around to say that it was not a good thing to leave dirty dishes standing overnight, but her mouth flew open with surprise. Two soft pools of cool liquid light were in his eyes, and something infinitely sweet passed between them. It was too beautiful to be loved. You are a very good woman, Panabote, he said softly. It was the truth, and the gifts were offered like a nugget of gold. Only men like Paul Thebolo could offer such gifts. She took it and stored another treasure in her heart. She bowed her knee in the traditional courtesy and walked quietly away to her own home.